Hello, good people of YouTube. Sealord here, and with 2023 coming to an end very soon, we are going to continue our end of the year tradition by looking back at the game and discussing the ships released during the year. Last week we talked about the top 5 ships that embody the changes and trends that we saw in the game in 2023. This week we're going to be discussing the worst of the worst ships released during 2023. Both premium and tech line ships are included in this list, and this list is of course 125% of my opinion. But if you want to see some other opinions, check out yesterday's video where we got to snatch an early access look at the upcoming Ubisoft game Skull and Bones, the kind of, I guess, Black Flag successor, but some things are worse than Black Flag, some things are better than Black Flag. It's a pirate game, right? If you're interested in pirates and tall ships and stuff, go check out yesterday's video. But on to today's video. Again, these are, in my opinion, the worst of the worst ships released in 2023, and of course ships you should entirely avoid at all costs, having to, well, pay money for, or maybe even just skipping through the tech line with some free XP. But let's go ahead and get on into it. Coming in at number 5, we have the Tier 9 American destroyer, the Halford. The Halford is just a terrible idea in my opinion. And this should be, nothing unfamiliar if you've seen my Halford review or heard me talk about the Halford throughout the year. So the Halford is a hybrid destroyer. Now, what you see on screen, a Fletcher class destroyer with a float plane catapult bolted to the deck, that did actually happen. The Navy did try this out with the Halford herself. So this is a real still hybrid ship, right? But you see, the Navy concluded that trying to strap a float plane to a destroyer just didn't work. And even then, the Halford's float plane was mostly for weather spotting and scouting. So it was most definitely not meant to be used as an offensive tool like is portrayed in the game. And plus the game spawns in 3 more planes when you get the plane up. The real ship only carried 1 plane. So yeah, that doesn't exactly bode well for the combination of float plane and destroyer in game. And it does not. Hybrid ships are a very tricky thing to master, shall we say. Typically, the only good ones in games so far have been the battleships, like the Issei and the Kearsarge and the American hybrid line. They're some of the best. Why? Because, of course, when you launch aircraft in hybrid ships, or off of hybrid ships, you have to control the aircraft. And with battleships, they're typically placed, towards the back of the pack, or in most cases, at least in medium range, and they can afford to, sit back and fly some planes for a minute or so. It's not really going to, be a big detriment to the team, because battleships typically, again, they have long reloads on their guns. They're typically toward the back of the pack anyway. They don't need to be, actively spotting and scouting and running, torpedo scouting interference and DD interference and submarine interference like destroyers do. And when you try to put that mechanic on a destroyer, it just doesn't really work out. Because again, with destroyers, you should be capping, you should be spotting. It's a very active class when it comes to, how much you have to interact with the game. And then when you give them a utility like a squadron of aircraft that, you have to fly around for a minute or two when you're in a very frail destroyer, you're now not playing your destroyer like you would normally play a destroyer, being very passive or using autopilot, sail your ship around. So it just doesn't work out, in my opinion. And when you do want to do destroyer things, you're completely, gimped, because you had to give up a turret to get this catapult bolted to your deck and a rack of torpedoes as well. So you're down a rack of torpedoes, you're down a turret, and they didn't give the Halford, a improved reload for its troubles either. So you're just a, undergunned, under-torpedoed Fletcher at this point, with a squadron that isn't really that great in the first place. They don't have a lot of HP, they get shot down, there's no heal or anything. So yeah, a completely mediocre ship, and hopefully the end of hybrid destroyers in this game. But again, we'll see what happens in 2024. Going down to number 4, we have the Tier 8 British heavy cruiser, the Nottingham. The Nottingham is an interesting ship. It's a British heavy cruiser, as you can see. She does have 9 guns. They are in the all-4 superstructure configuration. You know, that weight-saving configuration. If you missed the video from, oh god, when did I talk about the, with the defense, the very excellent Tier 10 British heavy cruiser. The idea behind this configuration is that this is a workaround for the the 1920s and the 1930s, when all these naval treaties were in place. There was limits put on the tonnage of capital ships, including cruisers. So you jam all the turrets in one spot, which means you can have a very short belt armor and save weight, rather than having to run a belt armor up the length of the ship. If you have a more traditional AB XY turret layout, right? So you don't have to run that belt armor from the front of the ship past the superstructure toward the rear turrets. It's all just shoved in the front. You can have a very short belt armor and save weight there. Now, the Nottingham has a lot of characteristics in common with the British heavy cruisers. For example, she has great HE in terms of the alpha and the fire chance, which is good. Her shells are pretty floaty like the rest of the British cruisers. And she is rather quite squishy, like, all the British cruisers. The British light cruisers are squishy, the British heavy cruisers are pretty squishy, but she's missing one key element of those cruisers, and that is a heel. And I'm not even talking about, she doesn't get the improved heel. She doesn't get a heel at all, which is, concerning. Now, you might be looking at the consumable bar and be like, well, Sealord, she has smokescreen. Surely on a heavy cruiser with heavy cruiser guns, a smokescreen is a fair trade-off for a British heavy cruiser for not having a heel. And I'd say, yeah, if it was a normal smokescreen, sure, I could see that. But this is not. This is the British DD short burst smoke generator, which means you pop it, you have a very short smoke screen, and then that's it. You can't sit in it and farm. You can't use it to, kind of hide right on the edge of an island and be able to back up behind the island when your smoke runs out. You can't really do that at all because it's such a short burst. It's mainly meant for disengaging, for breaking contact, breaking line of sight, going undetected, getting out of a troublesome situation. You can't sit there and, farm in it like you can with other cruisers that have traditional smoke screens, which doesn't really lead to greatness with the Nottingham. See, with the frailty of the ship, you really can't get caught out in the open because you're going to get nukes, right? Like it has, again, very squishy armor. So you have to pray you get a map where you have some islands that you can kind of hide behind, like an American cruiser, like what you see me doing in the background. And then, yeah, you can get some work in with it like that. But then that begs the question, why bother playing the Nottingham when you can play any of the other higher tier British heavy or light cruisers that have a heel, right? Like, the design is interesting, I'll give them that, but like, why would you make this thing give up a heel for a short burst smoke? It doesn't even get like radar or anything, right? Like if it had a radar and no heel in the short burst smoke, yeah, sure, I can 125% see that. But it doesn't. So it's just painful to play, really, and you don't see too much of them at all because, well, it's not a very good ship, in my humble opinion, and is why it's at number 4 on this list. Going down to number 3, though, we have another Tier 8 ship, but this time it's the Tier 8 Japanese battle cruiser, the Yumihari. Now, the Yumihari is it's a newcomer. The British battle cruiser, the Japanese battle cruisers just got out of early access, and I released my video on the line as a whole a few weeks ago, and yeah, they're a very confusing battle cruiser line. Like, they have the thinner armor, they don't have 32mm armor, so they can get overmatched by a lot more battleship guns. They have smaller HP pools like the other battle cruisers do, so it's all making sense, but then they're not really fast, right? Like, they go 31.6 knots, and that's from the Tier 8 to the Tier 10, and 31.6 knots isn't terrible at Tier 8, but at Tier 10 it's kind of like, it's a little slow for something that's a battle cruiser, right? Like, it's meant to chase down cruisers, but yet it can be outpaced by most of the battleships at Tier 10, right? So that's a little odd. But the other odd thing is the AP. The AP just seems to be painful, right? Like, it's not good at all. But the higher tier ships fix this by having, well, one 457mm guns and two more guns. The Yumihari, for example, has 8 16-inch guns at tier 8, which is undergunned for that tier. Now, it does have a faster reload at 26 seconds, so that's cool. But then the AP just, it seems to bounce and shatter and just not really do AP, right? You have to be rather close, and then it'll kind of put some work in. And if you catch, cruisers broadside at the right range, it will really put work in. But when it comes to dealing with other battleships, it's just kind of, you want to load HE instead. So, yeah, and if it was a normal battleship and it had 8 of these guns, okay, fine. But it's not. It's got thinner armor, less HP, it's 31.6 knots. Yeah. And the accuracy isn't that great. Now, it does get the improved spotter that gives you the 20% buff to your dispersion when it's up, and when that's up, it's kind of a bit better. I find that it's more noticeable on the Adatara and on the Bongo, but on the Yumihari here, it's just kind of like, yeah, the dispersion's a little bit better. So the Yumihari is a ship that we did play on stream a couple of weeks ago, and you guys got to see my complete and utter frustration with the ship and just bewilderment by the mediocre AP performance. And yeah, it's a ship I would recommend just free XPing through. In the tech line, the Adatara and the Bungo are much better ships, and it's kind of a, sour taste of what's to come of the line. Like the Bungo, I do believe the Bungo is a very good tier 10. It's just, this ship is just such a wet paper towel. It's just, I don't like it, if you can't tell. And that brings us down to our number 2 slot, which is the tier 9 Pan-Asian battleship, the Sun Yat-Sen. As much as the Yumihari doesn't really make any sense, the Sun Yat-Sen makes so much less sense. So, Sun Yat-Sen, she has 6 457mm guns. Now you might be thinking, Sealord, 6 457s at tier 9? That's pretty good. That's the same as the Georgia. Sure, in the number of guns and the size of the shells, that is the same as the Georgia. But don't insult Georgia by comparing it to the Sun Yat-Sen at all. So, what they did with the Sun Yat-Sen is, I could kind of see where they're going, but in the execution of their idea, it just falls flat. So, the 457mm shells of the Sun Yat-Sen have less alpha than that of the ship that the Sun Yat-Sen is based off of. The Sovietsky-Soyuz guns, her 16-inch guns, do more alpha than the 18-inch guns of the Sun Yat-Sen. Why? I don't know. Now, if you do look at the Sun Yat-Sen gameplay in the background, you will see that the dispersion is actually pretty decent for a battleship. Especially, it's a tier 9 ship, it's going to be more accurate than like a tier 7 and tier 8 ships, but if you play tier 9, you know that, hell, even tier 10 battleships have some really wonky dispersion. And the Sun Yat-Sen, more often than not, from my experience with her, she's more consistent than she isn't. But you have 18-inch guns, which means you can overmatch 30mm of armor. And if you're an older player like myself, you might be thinking, well, that's cool, you can overmatch like 2 more heavy cruisers at tier 10. Well, if you actually, sit down and look at the cruisers in game, there's a hell of a lot more 30mm armor schemes out there now. Then, of course, you have all the battle cruisers and such. So it's like, okay, cool, I see what they're doing here. They're giving a ship guns that can consistently overpin 30mm of armor, but the drawback is you have, the alpha of 16-inch guns, rather than the alpha that you should have with the 18-inch guns. But then, you give it 6 guns, and it's got this, 2 in the front, 1 in the back situation. So really, if you're trying to angle like you would in a Soviet battleship, like the Sovietsky-Soyuz, that again the Sun Yat-Sen is based off of, you really only have 4 guns in most cases. Soviet battleships, believe it or not, they're not nigh indestructible like, they might get hyped up to be. If you catch their broadside, they're going to feel it, and they're going to get, sunk. So you typically have to stay pretty steeply angled into the enemy ships. So again, with the Yat-Sen here, you're really only using 4 of your guns, and then they're not really 4 18-inch guns, they're more like 4 16-inch guns that can overmatch 30 millimeters of armor in terms of the alpha. So it's just kind of miserable, and it's slow. It's not fast like the Georgia, which, yeah, that comparison was drawn early on in the ship's development, but it did not hold up once the ship got released. And as accurate as the guns are, you still, of course, have those salvos that are, all over the map. And when you're angled in, only using 4 guns, and 3 of the 4 shells go into the water, that is incredibly frustrating. So a ship that has some interesting ideas to it, but was executed quite poorly, in my opinion. And that now brings us down to our number 1 slot. And that is the Tier 8 Premium French battleship, the Picardie. The Picardie is a ship that, on the podcast I had with Captain Greeny, Salt Ship, and Scuttlebutts, I think I summed it up the best, saying I was disappointed by the French twice in a month. One was the Napoleon movie, and the second one was Picardie. Picardie is the completion, the final piece, if you will, of the unofficial second French battleship line. The reload booster up tier line, if you will. For example, if you look at the premium shop, you'll see there's a French battleship, and in the armory too. There's a French battleship that's an up-tiered version of itself that the devs just slapped a reload booster on and called it a day. So, example, at tier 7, we have the Strasbourg, which is the Dunkirk, the tier 6 premium French battleship, up-tiered to tier 7 with 1 second faster on the reload time and the reload booster. And then from tier 7 to tier 8, we have the Leon being up-tiered as the Picardie with, again, a reload booster slapped on there. And then for the tier 9, we have the Richelieu, which is the tier 8, up-tiered to tier 9 as the Jean Bart with, again, the reload booster and an engine boost slapped on there. And then we have the Alsace, which is the tier 9, up-tiered to the tier 10 as the Bourgogne with, again, the reload booster slapped on there and some other tweaks here and there. However, with the Picardie, they did something very, very strange. They took Leon's 340mm guns, ripped them out, and replaced them with 305mm guns, or 304mm guns, one of the two, for some reason. I don't know. I would think taking a tier 7 battleship that already has small guns for its tier, and then up-tiering it to tier 8 would be enough. Slap a reload booster on that bad boy and call it a day. But no, they shrunk the gun caliber for some reason. I don't know why, but they did. So now you have a ship that already really couldn't overmatch all that much at tier 7, but now it's at tier 8 with smaller guns going up against tier 10 ships. But they give you a reload booster for your troubles, but they don't give you like an engine boost or improved accuracy or anything like that. And it's just miserable. I don't know why they did that. It's a very strange combination on the Picardie. So, needless to say, Picardie is a ship that you should not worry about picking up. You're probably going to get it. It's going to be the ship that's on like the short list, if you will, for like the Christmas containers and all the other premium ship containers next year, if I had to imagine. It's just a miserable time and a ship that's not worth it at all. And unfortunately, a bit of a letdown because the Leon is a pretty fun meme ship, right? And if you like turbocharged it and put it at tier 8, sure, cool. But they did, and it's like they turboed it, but then they ripped out the intercooler in the process, so the turbo doesn't really work that well. And yeah, that's the Picardie. So guys, those are my top 5 worst ships for 2023. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. What are your top 5 worst ships for the year? What ships would you add to this list? What ships would you remove? Let me know all that good stuff in the comments down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday and a wonderful rest of your week. I hope to catch you guys in the next one.